Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone, depending on what time zone you are on. This is the European Coalition for Israel webinar, Jewish Life in Europe in 2020, which is part of the Annual Policy Conference of ECI. 2 weeks ago, we were having a conversation with Ambassador Leshno Yar and MEP Lucas Mandel and representative from the External Action Service about the changes going on in the Middle East. But today we are going to focus on Europe, and we are very happy to have Katharina von Schnurbein with us today, who is the EU coordinator on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life, and Gregory Lafitte, who is our Director for UN Affairs. We will be joined with a recorded message from Chief Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt. Unfortunately, MEP Nicola Beer will not be able to join us, but she will happily join us at a later moment in a webinar or a conference. But very much welcome, Katharina in Brussels and Gregory in France, and I am in Helsinki. My name is Thomas Sandell. I'm the founding director of European Coalition for Israel. We are going to organize this hour in 4 segments, more or less. And by way of introduction, let me just start by asking a very simple question, or it may not be that simple, but starting with you, Katharina von Schnurbein. You are the first person to have this position as an EU coordinator on combating anti-Semitism. Why did you choose to get involved on this issue in the first place? There are many other I'm sure equally interesting positions at the European Commission, but you have had this position now, is it for 5 years, if I'm not mistaken? Yes. And I'm sure there is a story why you are so committed, because we can see that this is not just any career at the Commission. There has got to be something more. Please, can you tell us what it is?
Well, it is not an easy answer to this question. I believe that there were several aspects to it. One was that I had been already in touch with the Jewish communities in my previous job as the advisor to President Barroso on the dialogue with religions and non-confessional organizations. And so there had been already a certain contact, in particular to the religious side of the Jewish community, to Pinchas Goldschmidt, from whom we're going to hear, for example. Then I think there's also a personal aspect to it. I'm German. At our home, the connection to the Jewish people, to Israel, the responsibility before the backdrop of the Holocaust and so on has always been a topic, and the need to take individual responsibility as well with regards to reconciliation and standing up against any form of Jew hatred. So I think it's a combination of these two, and then maybe to some extent I also didn't know into what I was getting into, because I hadn't studied this subject, which is of course a big subject of research. There were many aspects that I didn't know, including also the diversity of Jewish life, although we had quite a lot of contact to the Jewish community also before, but and also the way in which really Jews are under pressure in Europe today. So all of this, I think it's been a steep learning curve. I've learned personally a lot, and I'm very grateful for this experience, although I resent the fact that despite all the efforts that we do on European level, of course, the concrete changes are not yet felt by the Jewish community. We still see anti-Semitism rising, and we still see that there are a lot of prejudices in general society. So, there is a lot more to do.
Yeah. Let me just say already at the beginning that not only the Jewish community, but I think broader, in a broader sense, there's a lot of appreciation for what you have done during these 5 years. And
Thank you.
You continue to be at the forefront in this global combat against anti-Semitism. And we are very grateful to have had the privilege of working together for all these years.
Yes,
so thank you so
you.
very much. Gregory Lafitte, you came from academia. You were a researcher and a professor in France. But now, as for almost, 1.5 years, you are with us and our UN director. There must be a reason also for you why you would give up an academic career to get involved in these issues. And please.
Yes, Thomas, well, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me share this panel also with Katharina von Schnurbein. And yes, we're happy that you chose to take on this role, Katharina. I think it's very important. Your question is too difficult, Thomas, but at the same time, I like questions. I think that's part of the Jewish culture. And it actually reminds me of the first question that is in the Bible, which is, where are you? And that's a little bit, you're asking the same question in a way. It's quite complex, but I would say there are different aspects to it. There's a personal aspect. I lived in Jerusalem. I studied at the Hebrew University. I have a very strong connection to the Jewish culture, to et cetera. But I would say that I'm a logician by training, so you never give up research when you're an academic. When you start as an academic, you never stop research. It's impossible. So I would say that in a way it's because I saw that there were possibilities for using part of my research in this fight against anti-Semitism. But also, when you see today how terribly important has been the rise of anti-Semitism, I believe there's nothing better I can do right now than do this. And we always sometimes ask the question, what would we have done really if we would have lived 80 years ago or etc. And I remember some time ago I would give this answer not knowing exactly what it meant, of saying the question is not what would we have done, but what are we doing today? And this way today I can do something about it. But yes, I must say that even if it's only been 1.5 years or almost that I've been full time with ECI. I've been working with ECI almost those past 10 years. But now, considering the importance of what is taking place today, I think I'm very happy to be working full time on this.
Yes, thank you, Gregory, and we are happy to have you on board. Both of you mention a word which is very central in our discussion, that is anti-Semitism. I thought I would start, and Gregory is of course a philosopher by training. Katharina is not, more of a legislator. But if we would stay away for the time being from the IRA working definition, is there a more general way of explaining what is anti-Semitism? What is the root cause? And if I can start with you, you realize we have only difficult questions today, but Katharina, I'm sure you have had many sleepless nights thinking about this question. Have you come to any answers yet?
Well, if you look back in history, you see that it has very deep roots. I mean, it's often called the oldest hatred, and even, if we look in the Bible, we find many examples of Jew hatred, but also miracles and ways to overcome it and to push it back. And I think this is in a way the dichotomy of anti-Semitism. There are deep prejudices that you can see in society also today. I mean, in the end, the racist anti-Semitism and the conspiratorial anti-Semitism led to the Holocaust, but we can find these same forms still today. And we also see that anti-Semitism always has developed, now most recently with COVID and the idea that the Jews are somehow behind this virus. So there are layers added on while the old forms never leave us. And this is the pernicious aspect, really, of anti-Semitism. And then, of course, the idea in the middle of it all that when Israel was created, a new form of anti-Semitism was created. So we could have thought that after the Holocaust, actually, we got rid of anti-Semitism, but we created Holocaust denial and distortion as a new form, and then Israel-related anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism as another form. And so, for me, this is why this is the case is very difficult to say. It certainly has to do with the fact that for some reason the human being needs the other and often seems to need the other as an enemy. But it also has to, I think, to do with the fact that Europe, in a way, was a rather homogeneous place for very long, and we see now that the societies are more diverse. That this hatred of anti-Semitism actually unites different forms of societal groups that resent the other. And it is also therefore so important that we address it. And then there's maybe one last aspect that has to do with the fact that when someone has deep anti-Semitic prejudices and feelings, very often they are also against other areas. They are against democracy. They are, in the end, against humanity, and it is for that reason that we believe that anti-Semitism, while it is first and foremost directed towards the Jews, in the end it harms all of us, and that's another additional reason why it needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Katharina and Gregory from.
Now I'm curious for the philosophical answer.
Yes, we all are.
Yes, I mean, it's a very difficult question, but and there's so many books and some really excellent books that have been written lately, actually, quite a few, which shows that it's a recent phenomenon, or at least the one that we're witnessing today. But I would say, you mentioned I am a philosopher. I'm more precisely a logician, and in logic there are several things we try to study, and one of them is infinity, and we say that all the different notions of infinity, there's one which is the most the greatest or the strongest, and it's a contradiction. It's 0 equals 1. That's the strongest, and in a way that's what anti-Semitism is. It's many times a contradiction. Anti-Semitism will many times be telling the Jew that he's more like too much like this, and actually it's the opposite, and then we're going to make this the opposite reproach, which will still be anti-Semitism. anti-Semitism, and Jews have been attacked to be being leftists and to being anti-leftists, to being to depend on society and to be rich, to almost every aspect. There's always a contradiction. But I think one thing that is a little bit overlooked most of the time is really what makes anti-Semitism very distinct. And I believe it's important to dwell a little bit on this, to look at it precisely. And we could go back to very ancient philosophers like Tacitus or to Thucydides or etc. But I think even if we go to resources like the works of modern philosophers, or especially for example one of the eminent linguists, Jean-Claude Milner. We realize that it's very different. It's very different from most racisms. And I would just explain it very quickly by saying that racism is the exacerbation of a feeling of superiority. Is that you believe that in a way you are superior in different ways than the other. Is it in terms of origins, language, the other person has not the same accent or culture or religion, etc. Anti-Semitism is almost the antithesis of racism, in that this discourse, it goes by asking questions such as, how is it that the Jew has something that I have not? How is it that he has what I am not? That he lives where I should have lived, that he succeeded where I have failed, that he somehow stole something that should have been mine. And I think there's the big difference. I think it's a strong difference, and it tells us a little bit. I will not go back to Jean-Paul Sartre, but it tells us a lot about the Jewish culture. And the interesting thing, and that's where I believe it's important to look at those positive contributions of the Jewish culture, and I believe we can come back to this later on, is that the reproach that has been made to the Jewish people through anti-Semitism is actually the opposite of what happened. Is that the Jews could have just kept their culture and their identity for themselves. They could have kept this treasure just for themselves, but they shared it with the rest of us. They gave it to us, and in a way, it even became part of our national identities, of our cultures, of our common culture. Even in Europe, we know that, but even in Africa and Asia and Latin America and the Pacific. And one example that came to my mind the other day was we even see it today in very concrete ways. For example, this song Jerusalema from South Africa. It's just an example how much the Jewish culture has not, they just didn't keep it for themselves. It has become part of our own identity. Sorry, that was a long answer, but that was a complicated question, Thomas.
No, that was a good answer, and we will have reasons to come back to it. But before we do, I promised that we would take in Chief Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt, and he is here. If you just bear with me a few seconds.
Thank you very much for inviting me to join this panel. Thomas, it's wonderful to be with you together, and also with Katharina and the other panelists. And I would like to comment on the question, how did Corona affect the Jewish community internally and externally, and how do we expect the world to change and Europe to change after Corona? Corona was and is difficult for communal life because of the lockdown, because of the financial ramifications, and we know that the Jewish community is, as a community, has been affected like many other religious communities by the distancing, the social distancing, and the lockdown. We also experience in Europe a new wave of anti-Semitism based on conspiracy theories that Jews to some extent have been at fault for creating this virus or transmitting this virus. And we have to know that this is not the first time in history that Jews are being blamed for pandemics. In the 14th century, during the Black Death, and afterwards in Europe, while political turbulence was rising in many countries, populists tried to use the ruse and the trope accusing Jews of putting poison into the wells, and major Jewish communities in the 14th century in Europe, the community of Basel and other communities, were burnt at stake and destroyed because of this populist conspiracy theories which found their way to the masses. Unlike then, today we also have to live with conspiracy theories, especially through the social media. And it is especially very important today to put limitations to demagogues and to hate mongers for the use of social media for anti-Semitism and other hateful speeches and racism against other minorities in Europe. And we do understand that, yes, we value freedom of speech, we value the freedom of expressing oneself, but this does not say that a private company or public company should put its platform for free to be used by those people who try to destroy our society. We also would like to point to the fact that part of this populist wave, which is dancing around Europe right now, has not been only street anti-Semitism or populist anti-Semitism. It has been also used by political parties, and we see these populistic tendencies through attempts at legislation against religious freedoms of Jewish religious practice in Europe, especially against circumcision and shchita and religious slaughter. And what is especially disheartening is that we see that if in the past those legislative attempts were used by the far right or the far left, today, as in Belgium and in Poland, it has become part of mainstream politics. And while we have many European leaders who say, yes, that Europe without Jews is not Europe, those leaders don't do anything to guarantee religious freedom for Jews who want to stay in Europe. So I would like to say to all those European leaders, it is not enough to fight against anti-Semitism on the internet. It is not enough to protect synagogues, community centers, and schools. What has to be done to protect Jewish life and to have a Jewish future is especially to make sure that there is no more legislation against Jewish practice in Europe, because such legislation which against circumcision would mean to a large extent the end of an organized Jewish country in that country where this legislation is passed. So I would like to ask all of our friends and allies and colleagues of different religious traditions to join us in making sure that one of the core values of Europe are being maintained, that as freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and the security of minorities as well as majorities in Europe are being maintained in the future as well. So I would like to thank you all for joining our panel, and it's a great honor to be with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt, who I should know is also the president of Conference of European Rabbis. If each one of you could comment on his speech, or you may want to pick up on something specific what he said, or compare your notes if you look at Jewish life in Europe in 2020, this year, which have been so distinct and so special and so troubling in so many different ways. Katharina von Schnurbein does the Rabbi's assessment. How does it compare with your own reflections?
I believe what he referred to in particular with regards to COVID is something that we have also seen with great worry. On the one side, we see this increase not only of hate speech, open hate speech, but in a way, sometimes even more perniciously, conspiracy myths that were created online in particular. Against the Jews, and that revoke, let's say, or let come to life a lot of the old conspiracy myths that we have seen over the past centuries. This is very dangerous also because we know that the road from conspiracy myths to actual crime, hate crime against Jews is very short. We saw that several of the terrorists that attacked Jews, like for example, the synagogue in Halle, radicalized themselves through the net, through these conspiracy myths to which Gregory also alluded. This aspect of superiority that is attributed to the Jewish community. Why do they have what I don't? This and it's very this is very dangerous. And for example, as European Commission, when we saw this in the spring, we together with UNESCO created a campaign on Twitter to debunk conspiracy myths in general. How do you recognize them? What can you do against them? How can you address people who spread them? To simply try to go against the stream. It's of course, only one among many things that need to be done, but we try to react quickly to this specific aspect. And then there is another aspect that I see with real worry now in COVID is that the Jewish communities, their identity is strengthened above all through their community centers, through the synagogues, through meeting, and none of this is possible at the moment. Also, a lot of the revenues actually come through these kind of physical meetings, and in particular when you are when you're in an Orthodox community and you don't use any electronics during Shabbat, then you are not going to move like we maybe do on the Christian side, move services online because no one would be able to watch them. So there is this this very concrete aspect as well that needs to be addressed somehow. And when I was when President von der Leyen came into office a year ago, she added to the title that was Coordinator on Combating Antisemitism, the aspect of fostering Jewish life, because we are acutely aware how important it is to ensure that Jewish life can flourish. If it hadn't been for the Holocaust, we would have a much larger Jewish community in Europe and a sustainable Jewish community. But now we have a community which in many countries is rather old, not everywhere. I mean, there are thankfully also some very lively and young Jewish communities, but there is clearly an aspect of responsibility from European side to support Jewish communities and also their social identity, let's say. And for example, we are very pleased to see that Austria has now passed legislation whereby the Jewish community every year gets 4 million euro for the support of these social aspects, because in the end, this is how it needs to happen. In Germany, there is already a contract, of course, in place also before the historic responsibility. Austria has now followed, but these are best practices where we think, and we encourage also member states to look at how to concretely now before the backdrop of COVID support their communities. And then there's maybe one final aspect, is that unfortunately in some countries, Holocaust survivors have, because of their age, been in a disproportionate number victims of COVID, and that's of course very sad. You know, they have gone through so much in their life, and then it's this pandemic that caught them. And this, I think for the community is also difficult to take.
Thank you, and we will come back to some of the things that you did bring up. But Gregory, what is your take on what you just heard?
I think it is, trying to use the right word, but rather depressing that we're still witnessing the same kind of accusations that we thought were long gone, that were only part of the terrible history of Europe, of the blood libels or libels or the question, the thinking that the Jewish people would be at the origin of such a pandemic as the one we are in right now, I think it shows something that we, as a civilization, as a people as a whole, we need to understand that there's some thinking that we need to stop from the beginning. For example, and certainly it is the role of the politicians to take on this mission of explaining that it's not because there is a phenomenon that there is a reason always behind it. You know, for example, what is happening today with COVID, with the COVID-19 virus and the pandemic, we're always trying to find someone who's responsible for it, and it's a little bit it's interesting when you look at the different novels or writings, some that are quite old, but some that are more recent. I mean, there's the Camus. When you think of a pandemic, you think of Camus, but also of Philip Roth, who wrote actually a very interesting book. I think the title is Nemesis, where he explains a little bit the same kind of situation we are in today with a pandemic, and we have to find someone who is responsible for it. And I mentioned already, I was and still am a logician, but there's this principle of reason that some say attribute to Leibniz, and it's this thing that there's nothing without a reason. And I think it's terrible that we're still here in this situation where we want to find someone responsible. We could call it a scapegoat, but it's terrible that we're still in this situation.
Thank you, Gregory. One thing struck my mind. Neither of you mentioned it specifically, and it's something I have taken a special interest in. Because on the one hand, it's sometimes easier to identify and recognize extremist views, say from the left or extreme right. But sometimes I call this sophisticated anti-Semitism. And he mentioned the problems with circumcision and kosher slaughter, which always seems to be very well presented as supposedly a conflict between human rights and religious rights, or animal rights, children's rights and religious rights. Sometimes I wish the European Commission would have even more jurisdiction, because if this is my understanding, there's not a lot that the European Commission can do really to interfere with the cases that was mentioned in Belgium. There's been in Poland. I know in Denmark it was on the agenda, even in Iceland outside of the EU. But Katharina, is there something you would want to reflect on when it comes to these types of threats? Let's not necessarily call them anti-Semitism, but threats to Jewish life in Europe. Because we can manage, even if we succeed to 100% to legislate against extremism, there could still be a very sophisticated liberal society that would think it's completely acceptable to ban both kosher slaughter and circumcision, and this would of course then be the end of at least religious Jewish life in Europe. What can we do to prevent this development?
I think we have to distinguish the two. So kosher slaughtering and the ban of circumcision. For circumcision, indeed, the EU doesn't have a competence. It's a pure national competence, and therefore also the member states have to decide. What we have done whenever this discussion came up in any member state, and also at the time when there was a court ruling even in Germany in 2012, is to say freedom of religion, and not only the right to freedom of religion, but also the possibility to exercise this right and to live your religion has to be guaranteed by member states. And so this let's say political expression has always been there from the side of the Commission. What the two have in common, circumcision and kosher slaughtering, is that both debates in themselves are harmful for the Jewish community, because they present Jews as being backwards, as being child molesters, as wanting to, well, not respecting animal rights and so on, And so I think we have to be very much aware of the fact that it's not the result that counts, whether this goes through Parliament or not, but whether at a very early stage, a national politician also, not just from the EU, stands up and says, if we go down this road of prohibiting circumcision, we eliminate Jewish life in our country. And so far, we have had this response, and there has been also from our side have been always talks with the different government officials and politicians on this aspect. When it comes to kosher slaughtering, it's slightly different, because there is EU legislation which on animal welfare, which prohibits in principle slaughtering without stunning, however, grants to member states the possibility for exemptions for religious reasons. And these exemptions are granted in most member states, not in all of them. In some, for very long time, this has been prohibited, in fact. But now we have a case before the European Court of Justice, and in fact, the ruling will come out before Christmas, most likely this Thursday, where Belgium basically decided from one day to the other that the Flemish part would no longer allow kosher slaughtering, where they actually don't allow kosher and halal slaughtering. So they don't allow slaughtering without stunning, and because the two slaughterhouses, so there were not many anyway, that do kosher slaughtering were in Flanders. That means concretely that there is no further kosher meat produced in Belgium, and that led to some shortages even during the COVID crisis of Pesach. So I think we have to look at this in that context. So the Advocate General's opinion of the court already lent very much towards freedom of religion and belief, which was also to a large extent the Commission's position. We will see now what the judges say, but certainly this ruling will be a landmark for Europe. And as I said, it is central that the Jews and all other religious communities not only have the formal right to freedom of religion and to change their religion, or but also have the freedom of assembly, for example, but also have the right to actually exercise and live their religion.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification as well. Gregory, is there anything you would want to add on?
No, but it's true that it's a little bit troubling to see again those questions of. I did notice that when I listened to Rabbi Goldschmidt, like you did, Thomas, is the question of circumcision and ritual slaughter it is very troubling that these are put in question, and I think I would not add anything to what Katharina just said, just to underline the fact that those two are parts of Jewish life. And so, as Katharina said, if we want to have Jewish life, if we do want to let the Jewish people live in our nations, we cannot
maybe can I add something positive to this, because I think we've looked very much on the negative aspects, and certainly there are very many negative aspects when it comes to anti-Semitism. However, now we are at the end of a German EU presidency, and Germany has really put the fight against anti-Semitism very high on the agenda. We had 3 presidency conferences and on various different aspects, and we passed a declaration on the fight against anti-Semitism to mainstream it in all policy areas now on the 2nd of December. But what is important is that in the reference of the heads of state and government, the council conclusions, there is a clear reference in connection with this declaration on anti-Semitism also to freedom of religion and belief. So what I saw in this process, because we had the first council declaration ever on anti-Semitism took place in 2018, where all member states unanimously agreed to address anti-Semitism in the various areas: security, education, and the so-called IRA definition for those who are familiar with it, data collection, police training, all of that. And it was very difficult to negotiate at that time and to agree on the simple fact that this could be a topic that you can address on its own and not in the broader framework of addressing racism. Yeah. Now, this second declaration was, I don't want to say a walk in the park, but it was much easier because member states understand, unfortunately also because the situation is as it is, but also because I believe truly there has been progress in the realization on political level that anti-Semitism needs to be addressed in specific ways, and that we mustn't, seize and lay back, but that really it is necessary to progress. And so there was broad consensus from the beginning of this process among member states that this is a declaration that needs to pass. And then, of course, you discuss wording, and I think that actually the text then improved significantly because different member states wanted to have different aspects in, and so I think that there you see that after all, on the political level, on European level, there has been progress. As I said before, it takes time until it trickles down, and until actually the actions that then need to be taken, and this, among other, is national strategies against anti-Semitism in all EU member states, which now we have already 7 that have that are in the process of adopting, and 7 others that do specific actions in the context of a larger framework. So there is also progress on that front. However, until then, you see that actually, because what we need is a paradigm change in society. Absolutely. You need a paradigm change in the thinking of the other, and we are, of course, in a let's say contradictory situation when we look at the political developments and the extremism and nationalism, populism that we see on the rise, and trying to fight anti-Semitism on the other side, where these 2 things have in the past always gone in parallel. The rise of nationalism and the rise of anti-Semitism. So we are operating in a larger framework, but nevertheless there is a clear willingness of the EU member states to go ahead and to do something. And I think it's now also the challenge is really to ensure that we get all the different actors, and in particular those who reach society, on board. For example, I recently signed a letter together with many other special envoys on the national level to encourage football clubs to adopt the IRA definition. And we saw that in the UK now the Premier League has signed up to it. We've sent it also to UEFA and other big umbrella organizations. So I believe also that to use existing structures will help us to reach a larger audience.
It was almost like you had been reading my notes for.
Oh, sorry.
Because I was just about to switch and come to what the EU or European Commission, I should say, is doing concretely, and there, of course, as I said initially, that European Commission has really been at the forefront, not only on a European level, but also on a global level. You did mention some things, but maybe if we could stop for a few minutes there, and if you could reiterate, you mentioned the IRA working definition on anti-Semitism. I think many are familiar with that. If not, you can Google it, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition. But if I would frame the question like this, it's if you would be a teacher of 27 pupils, which are the best in the class? You may not, as a good diplomat, want to say, well, who are the most awful, but you may want, you did mention Austria already, and perhaps Germany as with the current presidency, but are there good examples? You also mentioned that 7 countries have already an action plan that they have in implementation. But if you have an overlook at the EU as a whole, what can you say? For example, are there still countries which have not adopted the working definition?
Yes, so 18 EU member states have adopted it, including, for example, Cyprus, that is not a member of IRA. So there are still 9 that are missing, and we think that given that they have actually signed up to adopting it in the Council declaration, that there will be movement, and we see this IRA definition not only as a good educational tool to recognize all forms of contemporary anti-Semitism, which is the core of why it exists and why we should use it, but really also as an expression of political will to combat anti-Semitism in its entirety, and to use the Jewish perspective as a basis for it, because we would do that in many other areas of racism as well. If a Black person comes to the police and says, "I've been harassed because of my skin color," the police person will not ask and say, "Are you really sure?" you know, is this possible? Where you're not wearing a too short skirt, you know, or something like this. So I think we have to see that with regards to anti-Semitism, we have the same approach. We take the Jewish perspective when it comes to what kind of forms of anti-Semitism they encounter. And from our surveys, we did 2 large surveys. One was in 2018 among 16,500 Jews across Europe, and then another one, which was a so-called Eurobarometer, among the general population on their perception of anti-Semitism. And from this first survey among the Jews by the Fundamental Rights Agency, we saw that when it comes to Israel-related anti-Semitism, this is absolutely the #1 type of anti-Semitism they encounter. And therefore, it is very important because in the IRA definition, this kind of anti-Semitism is also spelled out, and this is of course always the elephant in the room when it comes to the debate of whether the IRA definition is being adopted or not, because some think that you cannot criticize the government of Israel anymore when you adopt the IRA definition, which is, however, not at all the case, because the IRA definition in itself says very clearly that criticism towards Israel, like that leveled against any other country, cannot be considered anti-Semitism. So, so it is simply an important tool that can not only be used by states, but also, as I said already, by NGOs, by civil society organizations, by churches, by anybody who wants to show publicly that they stand up against anti-Semitism. Then I think another important aspect is really the security of Jewish communities. Unfortunately, we are in a situation where all across Europe, security measures are needed. As EU, and in fact, the Council Declaration of 2018 started from the aspect of security, and member states committed to ensuring the security of their Jewish communities. We have worked with member states to ensure that this is done in a good way. So, that you have a joint risk assessment with the Jewish community, that you do training, that the police is informed, of high holidays, of Jewish customs, that judges can recognize anti-Semitic biases. So this is an aspect that we have taken very seriously, and we also, from the Commission side, supported the security of places of worship with a specific call for tender with 12 million euro this year. And security is the #1 concern of the Jewish communities, and understandably so, because if you don't feel safe, you doubt your future or maybe the future of your children on this continent. So it is really key. And then we have the whole big area of education. It's a challenge in the sense that essentially education is a member state's responsibility. The EU has no possibilities to legislate. So member states do their own curricula, they train their teachers, the whole school system is decided on national level, and that has its good reasons because of traditions and so on. However, we know that when it comes to not only anti-Semitism, but in particular also the history of the Jewish communities in the respective countries, that actually very little is in most curricula, and that therefore in the context of a working group that we created between the member states and the Jewish communities on European level, we discussed this aspect of how can you ensure that the way Jews are being portrayed throughout your textbooks in schools and in the curricula is not just related to the Holocaust or to the Middle East conflict. And I believe that there also in that aspect, there is an increased awareness. It of course takes time. This is a process that is a very long one. But for example, of all countries, Hungary has revised its curricula together with the Jewish community as to how Jews are portrayed. And so this, it is now important then also, of course, to train the teachers and so on. And we work together with international organizations like, for example, UNESCO, that does a very good work when it comes to addressing anti-Semitism through education and training national authorities. And we work closely together with them. And in that context, for example, there's also the aspect, and we raised that just recently in our working group now last week, of including into curricula for newcomers to European society, the aspect of Jewish life as being part of Europe, of the Holocaust, of which many of them have not heard because it's not been part of their national narratives, and also anti-Semitism. And that we had a very good example there from the Jewish Museum in Vienna of a shoebox with toys that had been prepared for a child that was sent from Vienna to a children's transport to London during the war, and then the parents couldn't send it off because they were deported themselves and they were killed. Then decades later, this box was found, and someone delivered it to the museum in Vienna. They found the person in Great Britain was still alive. And that person said, well, why don't you use it and you do something useful with it? And so now they started, based on this box, together with young Syrian refugees, to discuss, starting from the aspect of what would you have liked to take with you, if you had had the possibility. And then, come through this aspect of empathy to the Holocaust and what has happened to the Jewish community in Europe. So there are a lot of different ways, and we had this the lady or the director of the museum to explain this to member states, to show to them what is possible, and that more support for such concrete projects will help also reach out to newcomers. So I've talked a lot. I'm sorry, but there's a lot. There's a lot to say. There are many other aspects also with that we tackle, like hate speech online, for example. I hand back to the moderator.
Yes, well, thank you, and it's true. I mean, one hour doesn't is not sufficient if we really want to tackle this issue at depth, but. I'd like to take these last minutes and give over to Gregory, and then with the final comment from Katharina, because we said, and we won't be able to keep our plans like we had hoped to actually spend 15 minutes talking about the positive narrative. You did mention many of those things where you said that, of course, we need to remember that when young people growing up in Europe then think about Jewish people, they don't only think about dead people or about the Holocaust, but the fact that there's been a flourishing Jewish communities here. And Gregory, of course, and Katharina, you are aware of this work with the Forum for Cultural Diplomacy and what we call the positive narrative. Gregory, would you like to elaborate here at the end of why we say that the best way to fight anti-Semitism is really to not simply tolerate the Jewish people, but really learn to appreciate and celebrate Jewish life? What does that mean?
Yes, well, I know we don't have much time, so I'll try to be very brief. But in a way, I've already mentioned the reason, and it's in when I was making the distinction between anti-Semitism and racism, explaining that anti-Semitism was thinking that the Jewish people has something that we have not, and actually the Jewish culture is not something that is just for the Jews, and it has permeated, it has become a part of our identity, of our culture, and I think there, in a way, when we start taking this positive approach of the Jewish culture, of trying to fight anti-Semitism by expliciting the contributions of the Jewish culture to humanity, then in a way we can achieve two objectives. First is debunk anti-Semitism, and the other objective is really understanding how profound those contributions are. And of course, I don't have time to mention any of them really in any detail, but I love to study, try to see what are really concretely those contributions, and they depend a little bit from nation to nation, and it's fascinating to see what it has been the impact of the Jewish culture in Mexico, or in Peru, or in our European nations, and I think in Europe it's somehow even easier in a way, but and I'll just end by just one example, one very concrete example that is most of the time overlooked. And I think that the French should talk about it more. And I've heard President Emmanuel Macron somehow mention it in a way. And I love this sentence of him of saying that we are, trying to translate it in my head. We are deeply moved when we think of the contributions of the Jewish people to France. That was his what he said, I think a year ago. But one example is really the one of the most famous rabbis in the Jewish history, called Rashi, who lived in a small town of France called Troyes. Uh, uh, um, and he is really at the origin of the French written language, and this is something that I think we should make it more known, and especially to the French people, or to the French speaking people all over the world, and it's something that we should work on with La Francophonie in a way. It should be a joint project between the Forum for Cultural Diplomacy and the La Francophonie, and we could actually do an exhibition at the UN on this. But when you look at each language and each culture, you could say in Hebrew we say that there's like a thought of thoughts. There's a first thought, or an original thought, which is behind each language, and each you could say in German Urgedanke is something that it has really at the origin, or in mix of English and of Hebrew, you said the reshit of the thought, of the thinking, and it's in every language. And for the Jewish thought, the Jewish thinking, you can see it in Hebrew, of course. That's where you have the Jewish thinking, and to see that this Jewish thinking was very much at the origin of the French language, that many of the words of the French written language were first written with Hebrew letters by Rashi. I think is for me, it's one of the best examples. And the wonderful thing is that when we embark on this, and I absolutely love to study this. I mean, I'm not a researcher for nothing. Is that you discover that this is true for many cultures all around the world. And so the Jewish culture there has had an immense positive impact on the cultures of the world. And this dialogue between our national cultures, or our regional cultures, and the Jewish culture, I think is fascinating, and it can help, I believe, to fight anti-Semitism.
I think, Gregory, we should send a project proposal to the European Commission, and hopefully Katharina will we'll
Well,
write the idea.
Bring it on.
Bring it on. Yes, thank you.
And
No.
to la francophonie.
And the francophonie, yes, absolutely. No, in closing, and I'll give the last word to you, Katharina. But again, just to say how much we appreciate and enjoy our ongoing cooperation and dialogue. We had many discussions like this, but not on Zoom, and it's just been the three of us or four of us. But it's an absolute delight, and we always come out of these meetings as full of inspiration. But I'll give you last 2 minutes just to summarize from your side something you may have wanted to say and you didn't have the time, or if you just want to summarize in some other way, please.
Well, first of all, when it comes to Jewish life, I have to say, given that we are now in Hanukkah, I don't know what came first, but the latkes and the sufganiyot. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so, and there was a phone call coming in, sorry. So the latkes and sufganiyot, whether they were first somewhere else or among the Jewish community, I don't know, but in any case, I'm very thankful for them. And we've enjoyed a lot of them already. No, but more generally, I think that when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism, in the end, it's all of our responsibility. And as I said before, we can do a lot on European level, but really what is much more effective is if everybody takes a responsibility, if, people are aware of the forms of anti-Semitism and they have the courage to stand up in their immediate environment. And I know it can be difficult sometimes, especially when it comes to Israel-related anti-Semitism. It's not easy. We don't always have the arguments at hand necessarily when we are discussing it over a family dinner or in the context of parents' association or the sports club, or I don't know, the bike outing. So, but in the end, this is the challenge, to speak up when we hear it, and that's the responsibility of everybody. And I think that this, in the end, was also what Elie Wiesel said. That the worst is the bystander, and given that we hear and see so much anti-Semitism also online, I think we have to avoid becoming bystanders and find good ways and methods to, and in a wise way, stand up and contradict, because that's in the end the most effective. It's also the most difficult, because we see on the political arena what happens. The left points to the right and the right points to the Islamists, and then everyone is happy not being too much involved. But in the end, it's around us where we need to address it, and where we then also can do it in the most effective way. So I congratulate the ECI for continuously supporting all these efforts, and for being really very outspoken with regards to fighting anti-Semitism, but also the aspects of Jewish life, which you are increasingly developing. I think it's really very good to have these two together. So congratulations to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Katharina. I'm glad you mentioned Elie Wiesel. You may or may not know that the origin of ECI,
yes,
really, well, I can tell it for the others that already in 2003, 2004, there was an EU Commission summit on how to combat anti-Semitism. And Elie Wiesel, the late Elie Wiesel, we should say, the Nobel laureate and Holocaust survivor, he asked this question that I think many are still asking today. Why is it that it's only the Jewish people who have to stand up? Where are all the others? And we sometimes call our European Coalition for Israel a coalition of all the others. And you have again inspired not only us, but all those hundreds of people who are watching this now online to become people who stand up for the Jewish people in time of need. So thank you again, and happy Hanukkah to everyone, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. Yeah.
Yes.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.